With the help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Chav Dalid, again dedicating this class. Le'ilui Nishmas, both Tzipoira Bas Arya Halevi, Tzvika's mother of blessed memory, and Moshe Aaron ben Azriel Halevi, Shloima's father of blessed memory, made the Neshamas have an aliyah. Amen. We left off on Chav Dalid Amid Aleph, 15 lines from the top of the Amid. The last topic that we were learning about was this machlokes, and as it played itself out, there was different minhagim between the Yidden that lived in Bnei Yehuda, the Yidden that lived in the Galil, the Bnei Gelila, that the Judeans held Ein Avelus B'Shabbos, and the way Tosfos and many others learn Pshat, meaning that even by Dvarim Shebetzina, which will mean, can a couple be together, amongst other things, they held that there is Bechlal no Avelus on Shabbos. And the Gemara told us a story that there was a person who had a relation with his wife, right? And we're speaking about Shabbos. And when he passed away, there was retribution. The retribution was that a chazir ate up his male organ. Perhaps a chazir are one of the four animals that the Torah says that has one of the two simanim, and it normally shows off its split hoof. In other words, I'm kosher when the chazir is not. Here also, the paradox here is, on one hand, a person is indulging in something that the avil may not. On the other hand, like we learned, that on Shabbos there is a mitzvah for a man to be with his wife. So maybe that's the word that he was justifying. He came from a locality in which one was not allowed to have marital relations on Shabbos. That the yesh avelus b'Shabbos. He claimed that tuta mitzvah. So that was the chazid that is showing that I'm kosher when really it's not only not kosher but punkt fakert. Now we're going to learn more rulings regarding the conduct of an avil on Shabbos with more details. We're going to have a very important statement of Shmuel regarding kriya, and Shmuel says that kol kera she'einoi b'shas chimum, that any ripping of the garments that was not made when the person is in a moment of chimum, that means that there's a very strong emotional tearing of the heart, which is either during the passing, or when you find out the passing prior to the burial, or during the burial. Our meaning is that we do kriya during the burial. Shmuel says that if the kriya was not done b'shas chimum, it's not considered a kera. Now, one thing is very important, that if a person only found out about a passing after the burial, Shmuel is not saying that they don't have to do kriya. No, they have to do kriya. That's a mitzvah. What Shmuel is saying, as we will see, that if one already fulfilled kriya, but for whatever reason they want to do kriya again. One example that we will actually learn about on today's daf is that what were to happen if an avil during the 7 days, during the Shiva, they changed their begadim for whatever reason. Do they have to do kriya again? Regarding this is what Shmuel is saying, the mitzvah he already did, or she already did. Renting the garment during the Shiva after the burial is not called a shas chimum. It's a sad time, but it's not chimum. The tragedy is not that palpable, and therefore it's not called kriya. The moment it's not called kriya, it's called baltashchis. That's what Shmuel is saying, and as we'll learn more details, we're going to hear that Rava holds that an avil in the privacy of his home on Shabbos should walk around with his or her rent garment. And as we'll learn more details again, b'negei nihugim of Avelim on Shabbos, we're going to go from there to learn tragic, Rahman al-Itzlan, mourning practices when an infant passes away, how we mourn prior to 30 days. I know that generally in the times of Chazal, if a baby did not live 30 days, then it's possible that this child was a underdeveloped child. We're speaking here even in a case like nowadays when we can know that the child was a fully developed child. Still, if the child did not live a full 30 days, there is a limit to the expression of mourning that's done. Then you have 30 days and on. Then we're going to have other ages for different steps of Avelus. The older the child, the greater the mourning will be done, at least by more people. We're going to learn that an amazing statement, a huge chiddush, and we're going to go a little bit back to the Mishnah on Daf Yutes. If the first one to bring up the topic will be Rav Anan or Rav Anani Bar Sosain, that if the burial happened on, let's say, Erev Shavuos, Being that we paskin kedivrei hamekel in the Mishnah, not only does Pesach, not only does Sukkos completely cancel the Shiva, but even a one-day Yom Tov, we paskin also cancels the Shiva. So he has another chiddush, another layer, that the Shiva was cancelled when the Yom Tov began. Even though Shavuos is de facto only a one-day Yom Tov in Eretz Yisrael, as we'll learn, Shavuos is considered also a 7-day Yom Tov b'negeya, that it eats up another 7 days from the Shloshim. Basically, that means that if there's a passing on Erev Shavuos, it's not just that the family, being that they will express mourning prior to Yom Tov, even only Sha'achas, that the Shavuos will interrupt their Shiva. It's more than that. Between the interruption and the day itself that counts for 7, it's as if there were already 14 days of the Shloshim, plus Erev. Amazing. So you're only going to have the 16 or 15 days after Shavuos that will have to be kept as Shloshim. If we'll have time, and this year we're going to learn the Mishnah Mamash at the end of Chav Dalid Amid Beis. That's going to speak more about that which is done during the burial. We're going to go back a little bit to speak about the choil sin that we mentioned, that the minig then used to be, according to some, according to the Rabbeinu Hananel, that through the torn garment, the mourner, and the detail that we'll learn today, dafke, while they are walking with the beer, right, with the guf, prior to burial, they would put their body outside of that tier, which means that their shoulder would be completely exposed. So we're going to learn more about various parts of mourning that are done generally only for the 7 Avelim. However, as we'll begin on Daf Chafei, there are certain extraordinary people that all of us are considered Avelim, and thus all of us will be obligated to follow through various steps that are done by Avelim. Many, many more details in today's Daf. So let's start, Chavra, 15 lines from the top of the Amid. Amar Shmuel. Says Shmuel, and we are beginning to focus on practices that are required or optional on Shabbos. That Pechaz, we'll see that's a Rashi Tevis. These 3 chayva, one is required to do Pechaz on Shabbos, as we'll see in a moment. But Netar, the other 3 represented by their Rashi Tevis, Rishus, will be something optional. And right away the Gemara explains what Shmuel is saying, or maybe Shmuel said it. So the pay from Pechaz, Priya Saroish means that removing the unique head covering that mourners used to wear. Again, atifa saroish. Again, it's not done today, but it's a certain type of head wrapping, as we'll learn more details we mentioned, that goes all the way down. It covers not only the forehead, but it covers the nose. It goes all the way up to the lips. That is a unique beged that's only worn by a Avel, being that this is considered bifaharesya on Shabbos, as we'll explain the definition of bifaharesya. For sure, there's no avelus bifaharesya. You are obligated to remove that unique mourner's head covering. Similarly, the next ches is referring to people that they were poor. They didn't have various shirts, various jackets. The same begadim they wore in the week, that's what they can afford to wear on Shabbos. Challenge is that they tore their garments. So if that is your only garment, the ches means chazoras kerala choyrev. You are mechuyev if you're wearing like this long white robe, this jalaba. So at least turn it around. During the week, you are obligated to keep the torn part of the beged exposed in the front. On Shabbos, you are mechuyev to turn it around. So if someone looks at you, they won't see that you're wearing a torn garment. And the zayin is zekifa samita. Again, people then used to turn their beds upside down, dafka. And again, this is something that's considered bifaresia. And therefore, Shabbos, you are obligated to stand it back upright. That's chayva. However, let's go to the netar, the nun, ne'ilas sandal, wearing leather shoes. So it's interesting like this, that not everyone wore shoes. Not everyone wore leather shoes, even not on Shabbos, not in the week. It's important to wear shoes. People sell other items in order to buy shoes. But not everyone has to wear leather shoes. So therefore, the wearing of the leather shoes versus the not wearing of the leather shoes by default is called not befaresia, private. In other words, the definition of public-private is not the classic definition if you're doing something out there in the public, as we'll see, right? Your bed in your bedroom is not out in a public place. But since no one would have their beds overturned only if they are avelim, it's considered bifaresia, because if someone were to see Reuven's bed overturned, he knows that Reuven is a mourner. On Shabbos, you got to turn it straight up. Wearing shoes, you're not mechuyev to wear shoes according to Shmuel. You don't have to show that you're not a mourning on Shabbos, because even some people never wear shoes. Similarly, Tashmish Shamita. Here we go. Shmuel holds that one is allowed to have marital relations. He holds, but you're not mechuyev to. You're not mechuyev to. Because even not a mourner, sometimes a couple is together, sometimes they're not together. And the chitzas, yadayim v'raglayim bechamin b'arvis, obviously one cannot warm up water on Shabbos. And as we learned in Masechta Shabbos, Takana from the Rabbanon, that even water that was preheated is water in which we may not take a bath in. Because the Balanim used to warm up the waters and they would claim they did it out of Shabbos, but only using pre-warmed water to wash your face and your hands and your feet, right, is something that an oval is not allowed to do. But on Shabbos, again, if you would always wash your hands and feet on Shabbos with preheated waters, and you wouldn't do it this week, avelus, that's called bifaresia. But not even if you're not a mourner, not everyone always had their hands washed with hot waters. So that's something that you are allowed to do, but you're not obligated to do. That's the meaning of Rishus. And by the way, we see over here that Shmuel was of the opinion that Tashmish Shamita is not asur for an oval. He's not mechuyev, but it's not asur for an oval on Shabbos. Rav disagrees with one nekuda. He holds that af priyas haroish, the uncovering of that unique atifas haroish, avelus covering, according to Rav, that you don't have to remove it. And the Gemara is going to right away explain that they're not arguing in the definition of public or private. They are simply arguing what type of head covering was worn by an oval. Okay, today we don't do it at all. It was Shmuel that says that you have to wear it covering your forehead and your nose all the way down to your lip. Shmuel defines the atifas haroish as to be a garment that only an oval will wear, which is where Shmuel holds you are mechuyev to remove it. Rav's type of atifas haroish might even be that an oval, when he's sitting shiva, should be wearing his hat. So what? People wear hats even if they're not avelim. So exactly, it's not something that makes it clear that you're doing it because of an avelus, which is why, according to Rav, you're not mechuyev to remove it. Here we go. Gemara says, Shmuel Maishlan Eilas Sandal did a shus. Why? Because he holds it's not called bifaresia. Why? Because the lav kol yalma vidi the simon misanai. Not everyone wears leather shoes. So if someone is not going to wear leather shoes on Shabbos, you can't say, aha, you're mourning. No, lav davka. So ebazoi priyas oreish nami lav kol yalma vidi the megalo rashayu. Not everyone walks around in their homes with an uncovered head. Many people in their homes are always wearing, right, the malbish elyon, meaning the upper hat. So the Gemara says, Shmuel l'taimei the Amar Shmuel. And a couple of statements, and we're going to come back to the other statements, but again, we're going to just focus now on the unique type of atifas haroish that Shmuel explained. Statement number one, that's not directly negeya, even though we're going to speak about it in a moment. Kol keresh einem b'shas chimum, any type of renting of the garment, if it was not done while the person is in a moment of heat, meaning tremendous mourning, which is really death, finding out about death prior to burial or during the burial, einar kera, doesn't have the halachic status of a renting of the garment. And Nachamol, just to make it clear, if a person found out that there is a passing after the burial, Shmuel is not saying they shouldn't do kriya. There's a chiyuv to do kriya. What Shmuel is saying is, as we'll see in today's daf, certain people didn't only do kriya once. They did kriya during the burial. Then they did kriya during the shiv again. Many times they did kriya during again, as we'll see, because they were wearing another garment. Their shirt that the only beged was so dirty or so torn, they couldn't wear it anymore. So they put on a new garment. So the question now is, are you mechuyev to do kriya again? Shmuel is saying no, because now that you fulfilled your obligation, renting a garment is going to be stam bal tashchis. And number three, that's the key here, v'chol atifa. We're speaking about the unique atifas haroish, she'eina katifas yishmaelim, that doesn't cover your head as the Yishmaelim would wrap themselves, and those of us who are married and know how to properly put on the talis gadol, not during the whole davening, but during the bracha, you understand what this means. In other words, we are mamish putting it over our forehead, we're completely covered with it, which is something that people don't normally do. Says Shmuel, that's not called an atifa. So that answers the question. And not only that, Machvei, Rav Nachman showed what Shmuel was talking about. Ad goivei. Goivei doesn't mean height, goivei means hollow. Ad goivei de dikna. Goivei de dikna, again, machloikis. Dikna means beard, but many people explain it to mean that a person under their cheekbones, what we will call the hollow of one's cheeks, right, which is basically on the height of your mouth where you have a dimple, or maybe even underneath your mouth, that is up until where the covering has to be worn. B'kitzur, since Shmuel explains atifa as to be something that unique, that's why he holds you are mechuyev to take it off. Rav says it's reshus because Rav didn't have such a unusual atifa while one is in mourning, and therefore, like shoes, if you want, you can take it off, but you don't have to take it off. Why? Because anything that's not done only by a mourner is not something that you can consider that mourning befaresya. It's not public mourning, so therefore you could, but you don't have to.
And Rabbi, where does marital relations come in? What's the reason to say that it's okay, and what's the reason why not?
Okay,
it's not about public.
Oh yeah, no. So there's two things. So if a person, let's go this way, would always have relations Friday night, that would be considered practicing avelus in public. Public here doesn't mean in front. But if that's without
refraining from it.
By refraining. But since not every time a couple is together, so you're not mourning. But one thing we clearly see that they were of the opinion that it's allowed. It's not obligatory, but it was allowed. Unlike the story that we learned. Okay. Amar Rab Yaakov, Amar Rab Yechanan. That when do we say that lo yishanu ela? Lishanu means when the Shmuel hold that Avel is required to take off his unique Atifas Yishmaelim Avelus hat. That's only if he's also on Shabbos not wearing shoes. Verstehst? Means if you have a person on Shabbos, not he's wearing the leather shoes, and he's wearing that hat, that's called Avelus Befaresya. Avel Gavaldik word. But even according to Shmuel, even though other than the Avel no one wore that Atifas Yishmaelim, still the very fact that this person is wearing leather shoes, if the Avel opts to put on leather shoes, then his shoes are showing, are expressing that he's not praving Avelus on Shabbos, he's not practicing Avelus on Shabbos, and even Shmuel will be minded that he's not obligated to take off his unique head covering, which also makes a lot, I can identify with that, because we especially Lubavitcher Hasidim, we value the importance of having another covering during davening and beyond, but we're not that medagdik. This hat, the kasketel or that hat. So this hat, it's not the end of the world. It's only the end of the world if you're not wearing shoes and you're wearing that type of a unique hat. Then you're mamash mourning befares. All right, Vaitin says the Gemara. Kol kara. Now that we quoted Shmuel, let's go back. Shmuel says, Kol kara she'enim b'shas chimum, if you rent your garments, but it's not done during a moment of tremendous pain, which is making you hot, eino kara. Hold on. Says the Gemara of Shmuel, we know that when they told Shmuel the first wide line, Nach nafshei derav, that Rav passed away, is kara alei treisar money. Shmuel ended up ripping 12 garments. And by the way, it's a given that he wasn't wearing at one time 12 garments. Who does that? It means that he wore a garment today and he ripped it. Then the next day, Rav is no longer here. He ripped it again. It was at different times. All of that is just going to prove to you that it wasn't only when he heard the news, it wasn't prior to burial, it was on for 12 days. Or an Amar, and he said that Azel Gavra, that who went? A person that have a mistafinim in it. Shmuel says, I was afraid of him in a positive way. Shmuel knew that if he's going to make a statement that's not good, Rav is going to come at Akasha and he's going to be refuted. Kept him on his toes. There was no one like Rav. Similarly, Amalei, and Amalei let Rabbi Yechanan, when they told Rabbi Yochanan that Noch Nafshi, that Rabbi Chanina, it went up. Chara alei kleisad itali milsa. That Rabbi Yochanan tore 13 silk robes, expensive robes. And he had that same expression, and he says that Ozal Gavra, that a person who I was afraid of his deep analytical questions, and therefore I prepared a class better, and he's not here, that Tsar was expressed, was externalized 13 times. Again, the premise is it wasn't done. Now, if you're telling me that's not called Shas Chimum, if it's after the burial, so the Gemara says yes, it was. It doesn't have to be during burial. It doesn't have to be prior to burial. Shani Rabbanan. You're speaking about the passing of Rav. You're speaking about the passing of Rabbi Chanina. The Kivin, the Chol, Shata, Mitkra, Shmatayu. Every time we learned, we kept on remembering what they said, which means we remembered that they're physically no longer here to say. Is a higher level of tsar, and therefore even after the burial is kishas chimum dami, which is why in these exceptional cases, and by the way, that goes to a novel himself, that if he feels that level of chimum, for whatever reason, it's not called batashris, even though he's not mechuyev to rent his garments, but he's doing a correct thing. It's not called wasting. Batashris is only if a person wastes for no reason. That's a reason. Okay, right. Just parenthetically, just to make something clear, that especially as it says in the Zohar, that when a person feels anger and they externalize the anger by breaking something, that was a very old Avodah Zarah practice, and that brings into the world a ruach, a very unholy ruach. And that's Dafka people that were the pagans, Dafka did that. And tragically, this practice passed into our world, even though people are not oiv the Avodah Zarah, but there's this concept that when a person feels anger, he goes and he breaks things. And that's something that's highly prohibited, because then you give a body to the spirit of kas, which is the end of the world. It's really connected to kfira, kas. Here we're not speaking about kas, just to make it clear. Here we're speaking about tsar. It's a whole different thing. And there's a lot of, until Mashiach, there's a lot of tzad in the world. Kas is kli, but tzad is a fact. Tzad is part of life. People have tzad. And here is where we say, Adarab, there is a mitzvah to externalize the tzad, which is many of the practices of Avelus, also connected to Kriya. Let's go weiter. That Omar Talmitcha, Rav Amram, your student of Ramam said that, I heard a Braisa. He brought a Braisa. Tanya. Was steht in the Braisa? Avel. Kol Shiva, during the Shiva, Chaydo Lefanav. Right, he should have his garment, he should have his rent garment on him. Meaning that even if he's changing it, then Machliv, he changes it, and still he rips it again, because he has to have during Shiva a rent garment. Now all of this is a problem, right? This goes against Shmuel. What the Braisa is basically telling you, does an Aval have an option to change his clothing? He says, yeah, but to rip the new clothing. However, B'Shabbos, if you are using the same garment that you wore during the week, the one that has a rip in it, then turn the rent part to your back, as we learned before. It was all a jalab. It was like one big undershirt, all the way down to your ankles. But if you want to put on a new garment, like we know, machliv, then you can wear a normal garment on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to rip it, because that will be avelus befaresya. So this is a problem to Shmuel. But in other words, why are you ripping your new garment if it's not b'shas chimun? So the Gemara answers, it's taka not connected to kriya. It's not connected. You're not fulfilling kriya. You fulfilled kriya already. Interesting. A new layer. That by Yava v'imai, this is called a tearing for their honor. For their honor. And if it's not Ava v'imai, then you are not mechuyev for kibud ava'em or for moira ein va'av, and now it's going to be considered bal tashchis. Weiter. Another question. What did we learn previously? B'negeya, the difference we learned at Braisa between Ava v'imai and everyone else from the many nafkaminas is whether you are allowed to sew up the torn garment, and we learned that for Ava v'imai, you're never allowed to be ma'acha, to completely, properly fix it to the best of your ability. But now, if we're adding another type of kriya, anu madrega, it's not the mitzvah of kriya, but l'chvoid ava v'imai, a person is sitting with garments during Shiva, and it's not the one that they wore, that they tore, tear it again. Oison kiroyim misachim. Are you allowed to sew them up? Oyein misachin. For this, the Gemara says machlokes between the father of Rabbi Oishia and Bar Kapara. One of them says ein misachin, even though it's only l'chvoid, it's on a lower level. Chadamar misachin. Says the Gemara Testayim that the father of Rabbi Oishia was the one that says ein misachin. Why? Because we know that Rabbi Oishia said ein misachin. And who do you think he heard it from? It's not that the father is paskening like his son. No. Where did he get it from? Mistama, from his father. So it's he's the one that says ein misachin. Counters the Gemara no that since Rabbi Oishia he might have gotten it from his teacher. Rabbi Oishia might have gotten something mi bar kapara Rabbi Shmielei. In other words, it's a very important thing. Obviously, his father was a giant, but Rabbi Oishia had a rebbe called Bar Kapara, and in such a scenario, you don't by default paskin like your father, paskin like your rebbe. So the fact that we see Rabbi Oishia making a statement doesn't mean that he learned it from his father. Could be he sided with Bar Kapara, and Avua held the other side. Atkan, Nu Gemara, all about Shabbos. Back to Shabbos. Amar Rava. Listen to these words. Avel mitayel bu'unkali b'toich beisai. Wow. If no one is present, an Avel walks around on Shabbos with his rent garment. Here, he's applying the concept of Avelus bifaresia, which we may not practice, versus Avelus bitzina. That's called sina. And he holds that you have to practice Avelus B'tzina. So if no one is in your house, wear your turn garment. Abaya also found that Rabbi Yosef, the Paris Le Sudar Areshe, he was still wearing his Sudar, means a certain kerchief. And Va'azal Va'asim B'Beisi, while he's walking in his house on Shabbos. So Amalei, Lav Tzava Lon Mar Ein Avelus B'Shabbos. Amalei, Hacham Rabbi Yechanan, Devarim Shebetzina Noyeg. Now this is very important to close the sugya, right? Then so above we were learning right by Tashma Shamita, optional. The word here is that Rabbi Yechanan holds not Devarim Shebetzina optional. Devarim Shebetzina you are mechuyev to keep, which would mean coming back to Tashma Shamita you would be asir in this definition. If it's in your house, it's called tzina. According to this definition, your atifa saroish that befaresia you would take off in your house, you are mechuyev to leave it. That's basically what Rabbi Yosef told his Talmud Abaye. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar Oymen Mishachor Rav Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Eliezer. So let me quickly go back to the Mishnah Daf Yutes. So what did we have? We have this concept, unlike Shabbos, that for Yom Tiv, at least for the Yom Tovim that have 7 days, the Mishnah says that mafsikin ve'einam oilin. Opinion number one now was Rabbi Eliezer, that says einachanami b'shas habayis, since there was Yemei Tashlumin, even though Yemei Tashlumin is only that. No, but that's already considered. He held that Atzeres Shavuos will be like Pesach and Sukkos. But Mishachar Beis Hamikdash, the Atzeres is only like Shabbos, which means, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it does not interrupt the Shiva. The Shiva continues afterwards, just as it does on Shabbos. Rabban Gamliel, I'm just finishing to read in the Mishnah, because we had 3 opinions. Rabban Gamliel says that not only is Atzeres like Shabbos, it cuts it, even Rosh Hashanah, even Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a moyed, but it's not a regel. It also completely cancels the Shiva. And the third opinion of the Mishnah, where the Chachamim, like Kedivrei Zeh, a regel cancels, including the 1-day regel Shavuos, but Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they are like Shabbos, and it therefore does not interrupt. Now, so the Gemara says, first, just Rabbi Eliezer, Oymen, Mishchar Beis Hamikdash, Atzeres Keshabbos, V'chulei, we have 3 opinions, and the third one, which is not the most lenient, is not Shitas Harabim, but what are we learning the whole time? That halacha kedivrei hamekel. So indeed, Amar Rav Gidol Bar Menashe, Amar Shmuel, halacha kerabban Gamliel. Now, obviously, the halacha will be like Rabban Gamliel because he's the most lenient. Problem is, why do we need Shmuel to say it? If another Ramaita would have said it, it wouldn't have been a problem. Because who says that everyone agrees Shmuel is the one that says halacha kedivrei hamekel? But here we are having Rav Gidol Bar Menashe quoting Shmuel. We need to have Shmuel, and because of that problem, there's an Ikad Damasni. So we're not rejecting that we talk. By the way, we paskin like Rabbi Gamliel. If a person, Rahman al began Shiva before Rosh Hashanah, the Rosh Hashanah is going to cut the Shiva. We paskin like that. The only thing is, we don't need a special additional statement of Shmuel regarding this din. He already made a general statement. Halacha k'divrei hamekel. But there was, Rav Gidel Bar Menashe did quote Shmuel, so it's about another topic. And now we're going to have a lengthy braisa. And in the middle of Amud Beis, we're going to come back to the second version by saying it was regarding this braisa that Shmuel said, halacha k'Rabbi Gamliel. So let's go. Second to last line, says in the braisa, kol lamed yoim. If an infant, even if we know maluloi chadashav, even if the baby is full term, still, if, God forbid, the infant passes away prior to 30, within the 30 days, so number one, tinik yoitzei bechek, which means that we don't walk the child in an aroin for burial. We can carry the child in one's hands, in one's bosom. In other words, the more steps that are needed to happen for the burial, all of that externalizes more the tzar, and it brings about a higher level of avelus. Now, no one is speaking about how people feel within their own hearts. But bechitzonius, in other words, you don't go through all of the steps. The baby is buried by simply carrying the baby. Parenthetically, no one should ever have to see that. Now that it's the norm is to bury people in an odin. If anyone saw, I know in Eretz Yisrael it's different, but b'chutz la'aretz, if the baby is being taken without an odin, it brings to the observers, to me, a lot more tzad. You see the form of the baby. People are not familiar with that. But we'll see over here, there was carrying, there was putting the child on some sort of bed, and then there's carrying, then there's carrying a box, and then there's putting the nifter or the nifteris in a beer. Each one is considered a greater expression of grief. So here it's minimized. Next, another din. Even though we learned before in the Masechta about the chashivus and the great mitzvah that we have to participate in a burial, and how many people are there for you to say, right, that we have enough people, you don't have to be mevatel Talmud Torah. We had all those opinions, with tremendous numbers of people. That's only when it was a person over 30 days. If someone passed away within 30 days, all we need present are 3 people. 3 people, and they can be both men and women. So says the Braisa v'nikbar be'isha achas u'shnei anashim. The point the Braisa is trying to say is that you don't need 3 men; it can be 3 people. But milsa al gavurcha, that if you're having both men and women, since the common place of a Beis HaChaim is outside the city, and the Isur of Yichud doesn't only mean if you are in a room that has a closed door. Going out there in a secluded area is also called Yichud. So not to violate Yichud, if you're going to have both genders, so you would rather have 1 woman and 2 men, as we'll learn more details in Masechtas Kedushin, that's not considered Yichud. Avoloi be'ish echad u'shtei nashim, because even though there are 2 women, but there's a chance that there's going to be a not kosher behavior between the man and the 2 women. So to prevent Yichud, don't have that setting. And all this we learn in Kedushin, Daf Chav Daled Amud Beis, and on that Abba Shaul Oimer that no, he agrees that normally there is today a Isur of Yichud with 1 man and 2 women, but during a burial, that level we're not concerned about. Af be'ish echad u'shtei nashim. Look inside the top Tosfos. Abba Shaul Oimer af be'ish echad u'shtei nashim befurish the Masechtas Kedushin the Afal Gav that normally eight ish misyachid im shtei nashim. B'shas avelus detrida shari, and we all know this. But during avelus, there's so much. The word itarud means you're occupied, but you're occupied in sar that diminishes the koyach of the yetzer hara. And in this setting, coming back, you only need to have 3 people. Another detail. How
does this connect to the baby and the 30 days?
In other words, we're going through different halachos in which, if an infant, God forbid, passed away within 30 days, there are less demands. So you don't need to have an odin. You can bury without an odin. You don't need to have a lot of people. 3 people are enough. You're not mevatel Talmud Torah as long as you have 3 people. This was just a side that if the 3 people are not made of the same gender, make sure you don't mix them in a way where there's a yichud issue. Next, you'll see, it's a hemshech, Danny, right? Where are we up to? The second line on Amud Beis. Another din, ve'ein oimdim alav b'shura. The proper thing right after a burial, we do this in the Beis HaChaim, is that the people that were malave and had the schus of participating in the burial, they're going to form two lines, one opposite the other, and the avelim, that's the way it's done now. The avelim will walk in between the rows of people, and that will be the first time that the people will formally use the words of nicham avelim. With nuances, right after they walk through, the lines close behind them, v'chulei. You don't do that. In other words, Danny, we're just taking away steps. Taking away steps means we don't overly do it. We're not, God forbid, no one should know, taking away the tzad of the parents. But we don't, we externalize it less. Next, ve'ein oimrim olav birchas avelim. So another minute, that after the burial, it's important that people, not family, not immediate family, should buy the first meal that is called su'udas havra'ah. Havra'ah doesn't come from the word brius. Havra'ah comes from the word bar, food. And we make it very simple. This is exactly the same type of meal that we eat prior to the building of the third Beis HaMikdash, right before Tisha B'Av, right? What we call su'udas hamafsekes. It's bread and eggs. So you don't serve them the Sudas Havra. I'm saying that during the Sudas Havra, people would offer them a special bracha that was called Birchas Avelim. So none of that is done. Or at least the bracha is not said during the Sudas Havra, nor V'tanchumei Avelim. Wow. That means that people don't, during the Shiva, people are not going to come and say the words Hamakim Menachem Eschem. That's only because it wasn't 30 days. Ben Shloishim, if the baby was already 30 days. So number one, to carry out this infant, b'cheik, just in the bosom, is not respectful enough, or it's not expressing grief enough. It's not about respect, about expressing grief. So here, yoytze b'deluskama, the child, the baby, is put in a box. And details now. Well, 1 second. Tell us it's not the type of box that would allow someone to carry it, throwing it over their shoulder. That would be considered not respectful. The baby is little, the box is little, the weight is not that much. When the baby is not in the box, you need to use both of your hands. The body should be held respectfully. A box might allow you to carry it disrespectfully by just putting it over your shoulder. Don't do that. Ella hanitelas, or a type of box that normally is meant to be taken ba'agapaim, in the arms, because then you're using both arms. It's more bachavadik. And already 30 days for you have to make a shura, and you have to give the special birchas avedim that was given to the mourners during the Sudas Havra. They used to eat the Sudas Havra on the street. And that's when people would come and offer them this whole bracha. And during the Shiva you say v'tanchumei avelim. No, it's not addressed over here as a, God forbid, if there is a stillbirth. And sometimes, if a baby, God forbid, loses its life, or a fetus, at the end of the pregnancy, they're fully formed. So over there, it's a whole different world. The baby has to be buried, but there we advocate for the parents not to be there. And even though our minig is we're going to give a bris to the baby, not on the 8th day, prior to the burial, we give a bris, we give a name, but we don't put it on the matzeva, and we don't notify the parents where the baby is buried. For them not to grieve more than the norm. See, grieving is a balancing act. Not grieving is not healthy, but we're speaking about halach, is not good. Over grieving is oichet nish good. Let's not forget that the neshama never passes away. V'chulei v'chulei. So this is, the Torah establishes the exact balance. So here we're speaking about already babies that are born breathing. What happens if they pass away within 30 days? Now, once they hit 30 days, ben yud beis chodesh, now already yoytze b'mita. Mita means a beer. People that see burials in Eretz Yisrael, they know exactly what this is. In other words, the body is not in a box, fakert. It's considered the most respectful. And you have this beer. And then you take the person out of the beer.
Actually, they make this difference today, Rabbi?
No, we don't do that. We don't do that, Danny. I can say at least in Chutz Laretz, because in Chutz Laretz, Danny, everyone legally needs to be buried in a box. It's different. Rabbi Akiva Oimer.
I'm saying in Eretz Yisrael, would they take a over 30-year-old baby, but less than 1 year?
I don't know, Danny.
Put it in a box.
Baruch Hashem, I never saw that, and no one should have nicht. I don't know. Rabbi Akiva argues. Rabbi Akiva says, no, a year. It's not the year. There has to be some 2-year element. Not that the baby has to be 2 years old. He either has to be big like a 2-year-old or 2 years old, even little. Look at this. That Rabbi Akiva Omer, that if he's only ben shana, but at least if his evarav was keben shtayim. Today when you buy baby clothing, going on to a happy topic, how common is it? They write on the package from 6 to 12 months. That's good for the baby by us. I don't know. The baby can be big. So if the baby Begashmias is like other 2-year-olds, even though he's only 1-year-old, then he's moide that he's yoytze b'mita. Or if the baby is taka 2 years old from birth, even though he's relatively little, and God forbid he passed away ben shana, that is when yoytze b'mita. But if he's only 1 year old and the size is not yet of a 2-year-old, then he's also only yoytze in a deluskema. Okay, weiter in the Brais. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Oimer, hayoytze b'mita. I'm not getting into that machloikes. But let me say like this, that it's not just that carrying the mace, the niftar, to their final resting place until Tchias HaMesim, right? A beer is considered the most respectful. It's more than that. Once you're using the beer, the mita, then Rabim Matziv and Olav. Then people have to publicly grieve. You know, the goal, you know, everything has its time and place. You know, the Lahavdol the Goyim speak a lot about celebrating the life of. That's not by the Yidden. By the Yidden, burying is not about celebrating a life and reminiscing and laughing. No, it's to make people cry. So there's an inyan to people should connect to the tsar of what happened. So Rabim, the word matzivin means to grieve. The public are mechuyev, not only the parents. But if ein yoytze b'mita, ein am matzivin olav. Those people that have the merit to participate, it's not just to be there. There's a certain amount of shed a tear by a levaya, by a burial. Another din. If nikar larabim means, because we learned until now, under 30 days, 1 year, like a 2 years. Now, nikar larabim is still about a child. Nikar larabim means children that already began to go to shul, which means who knows these children? Not only the parents. The oilam, the community knows them. Or today you would say children that go to school, whatever that age is, 5 years old, 6 years old. If he's known, then Rabim Misaskim Imay. When we learned above, Mevatlon Tamil Torah, and everyone has to be Misasek. Everyone has to be Misasek in the burial if he reached that age. Ein Nikol Rabim, then Ein Rabim Misaskim Imay. Weiter, Bryce. Umahin behespet. In other words, what status? From when do you have to make a hesped? From when do you have to make a hesped? So Rav Meir, in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, says, listen to this. If the child comes from a poor home, from when they're 3 years old. If they come from a wealthy home, only from when they're 5 years old. Why? Because to raise a child, when a person is wealthy, not God forbid that the wealthy people, they have other things. Nothing compares to having healthy children. Emes. Mitzat Sheni, the healthy person didn't feel the tsar of the investment to feed his infant children because of had geld. He didn't feel it. A person is poor to raise children, to pay for their food. Number one. Number two, poor people, they don't have anything. So they think at least a chab kinder. There's more tsar for an ani who, God forbid, loses his child on some level. And therefore, even when he's younger, there's enough tsar which obligates us to make a hesped. Interesting. If he's a b'nei ashirim, then from 5 and older. Rabbi Yehuda says Mishmai, the first wide line. Mishmai means machlekes. What is shitas Rabbi Yishmael? A little bit older. Aniyim b'nei chamesh, ashirim b'nei sheish. Then it also says that B'nei Zekenim. B'nei Zekenim means when a couple is of age of having children, whatever age that is. Rachman al-Itzlan, they lose a child, they know they can have another one. It doesn't replace, they're not having the same one, but there's a certain diminution of. B'nei Zekena means you have a couple, they had their youngest child, however you'll define this, they understand this was the Mezinik. If that one passes away, it is more tzad. So even if they're wealthy, kibnei aniyim. Okay, now we had all these shittas. Why is it neged? Because we began, right, we quoted that Rav Gidel, Bar Menashe, Amar Shmuel, Halacha K'Rabban Gamliel. Now, this is the second version, that on this Braisa, Amar Rav Gidel, Bar Menashe, Amar Rav, first of all, it's not Shmuel, it's Rav. Halacha K'Rebbe Yehuda, that Sha'amar Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, and not like Rav Meir, which bumps up the age, B'nei Chamesh, B'nei Sheish. By the way, it's also a leniency. It's also, in other words, if it would have been Amar Shmuel, they would have had the same kasha. Because it's called a leniency. You don't have to make an hesped. There are certain steps that you don't have to do. So it was in the name of Rav, it was regarding this that we also opined. Again, here, B'Poel Mamish, that we followed the Mekel. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to a bomb statement over here. The general concept we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Gamliel, and the Chachamim, is that Sukum Yomtiv, the Yomtiv Mamish interrupts the Shiva. And then we also mentioned that if a person already exited the Shiva, if they are in the Shloshim, what did we learn? A Yomtiv interrupts the Shloshim. Very nice. But he's adding a whole new layer to this. Think about the Mitzias. When a person, God forbid, began their Shiva, let's say, Erev Pesach. So what happened? Pesach interrupts the Shiva. But it's not only that. During the Yom Tov of Pesach, you can't say that this person is marking their shloshim. It's Yom Tov. Now, will they launder the clothing? No. Will they take a haircut? No. Will they cut their nails? No, because it's Yom Tov or it's Chalamayit. I know that. But there's a certain amount of... So when are they doing certain practices only because of shloshim? Only for 2 more weeks. Because once you discounted the Shiva ended, the Shiva ended, so you should have really now, it's not only that you don't sit Shiva, it's as if a week passed. The Yom Tov cancels the Shiva, so as far as Shloshim is concerned, you only have 21 days left. Comes the whole Pesach, comes the whole Sukkos, that week is also not counted as Shloshim. And even though you're not going against the Dinim Shloshim, but you're not marking, you're not doing something because of the Shloshim, you're simply keeping Yom Tov. So you only have basically 2 weeks left, or 16 days left, right? 14 plus 16 to come to Shloshim. Very nice. What about Shavuos? Gesund to hate be paskin like Rabban Gamliel, even by Rosh Hashanah, but even for Shavuos. He's saying Moededik. He's saying that even when you only have the 1 day regel, even when it's only 1 day of Shavuos, and similarly, as we'll see soon, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that's not even a regel, but according to those who opine that it's mafsik, the Shiva, that day is like 7 days itself, which means that when you finish Shavuos, you already have 14 days. Hence, let's read it inside. Darash, the third wide line, Darash Rabbanoni, Bar Sason, on the door of the Beit Nasi, of the house of the Nasi. Guys, the Nasi, Hashgacha Pratzis, we just had this in the Rambam, right, is the leader of the Jewish community in the Holy Land. And the Reish Galusa was the leader of the Jewish people in Bavel. So he was darshaning in front of the house of the Nasi, that Yoim Echad Lifnei Atzeres, we paskin that Atzeres cuts the Shiva, which also means you don't count 7 days of the Shloshim, you already ate up 7 days. By the very fact that you're out of Shiva. The Atzeres, which is really only 1 day, will also count like 7 days. That's a big chiddush. Therefore, Hadekan Arba Asar. Wow, so all you need now is 16 more days. Shamar Avami, and he got upset at Rabbanoni, not because he disagreed with him, but because he knew that this is not Rabbanoni's chiddush, and he should have said B'Shem Oimroi. And Omar, and he says, Atu Didehi, that's his. He came to that on his own? No. That Rabbi Lazar Amar Rabbi Shehi. And he should have quoted him. And before we go on to quote him, another similar story. Darash Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, same thing, Akila, on the porch or on the entrance of the Reish Galusa. Yoim Echad Lifnei Atzeres Va'atzeres Hadekan Arba Asar. And Shomer Absheish is an Ikbad. And why was he upset? Not because he said something wrong. He had the same taino. Amar, Atu Didehi, that Rabbi Shehi. Here, let's go to Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Ishia. Minayin latzeres sheyesh lo tashlumin kol shiva. Now, we're going to learn the next Masechta, Chagiga, and we're going to focus on Shalmei Chagiga, even though this halacha goes for Oilas Re'iyah, as we'll see in Chagiga, but there is Lechatchila, we should bring a carbon on Yom Tiv. We learned the whole Machlokes and Beitza, Beishamai, Beisilul. We'll get into that again when we're going to learn Chagiga, whether you could shecht it, whether you cannot shecht it. But when it comes to other Yomim Tovim, like Pesach, if a person didn't bring, let's just focus on the Shalmei Chagiga on the first day of Pesach, they can make it up. When? Throughout the next 6 days. So it's really, they can bring it over 7 days. Same thing with Sukkos. So say Chazal that if a person did not bring the Shalmei Chagiga or the Oilas Re'iyah on Shavuos, which is only a 1-day holiday, there's also an opportunity to pay for it, to make up for it, called Tashlumim, Kol Shiva. Kol Shiva includes Shavuos. Shenamar, as it says, and we're quoting the end of Parshas Re'eh, where the whole pasuk is considered the extra. The Torah says Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Mr. the Bach adds Chag HaSukkos. And the reason why the Torah writes them again together is to juxtapose and learn one from the other, including, there are many limudim, including Ma Chag HaMatzos yesh la tashlumim kol shiva, Av Chag HaShavuos yesh la tashlumim kol shiva. Hold on. Okay, this we know already. The chiddush here is that what he really was implying with that, not only that you can do tashlumin, but since you can do tashlumin, it itself counts for 7 days. Now that's a wow. It itself counts for 7 days. It's a big chiddush. That's why you should have quoted the author. Now the Gemara says, we're going to extend this, that Adebare or Adebre, Rav Papa, Rav Avi Yosava, when Rav Papa was walking, Rav Avia the elder, and Rav Papa is darshaning to him that when we say Yom Echad Lifnei Rosh Hashanah, what did we paskin in our Mishnah? Not like the Chachamim. We paskin like Rabbi Gamliel, that even Rosh Hashanah will cancel the Shiva. So I'm going to say the same word. So 1 day before Rosh Hashanah, now I know that Rosh Hashanah now was 2 days, or it was 2 days as we learned in the prior Masechtas. Say it doesn't matter. Those 2 days also count for 7 days. Harekan Arba Asar. Now we got a problem, a big problem. What's the big problem? Lamai nafkamina. What do you mean Lamai nafkamina? Normally, there's dinim of shloishim. Let's go with the ikir, right? You can't cut your hair, you can't cut your beard. People who trim their beards, you can't cut your nails. Okay. Yom Kippur, no matter how much you cut out of the shloishim, anyways, without the statement, if you are already in your shloishim, we paskin that Rosh Hashanah cancels the Shiva. So after Rosh Hashanah, you began your shloishim. You only have 1 week between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim. Anyways, Yom Kippur is going to cancel the shloishim. So why did he have to make the statement? Tosfos has phenomenal, innovative chidushim. I'm going down, I think, 7 lines under the Gemara. Right? Under the Gemara. And Tosfos did Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Ishii. So first of all, Hiksha b'Tosfos harav. Manu tzarichim shei Rosh Hashanah kishiva. I don't need for Rosh Hashanah to be like 7 days, right? Balav hachi nami mutal agalech erev Yom Kippurim. Why? Da have a koiveres meise shmoine yamam koidem. Shmoine yamam means even lachachamim who don't subscribe to Yom Echad mixas hayom kekoli by the shiva, but Yom Kippurim the batlei menu gzeira shloishim. So first of all, if you remember, we learned above the machlokes. And it became a machlokes tanoim. If Erev Yom Tiv during the shloishim you did not take a haircut, some were of the opinion you lost now. Now Yom Tiv doesn't cut the shloishim. That's why, that's a chiddush. Even according to those manda amnim, that if you didn't chaparayin and be migaleach Erev Yom Tiv, after Yom Tiv you have to finish counting the shloishim. Not over here. Not over here meaning Rosh Hashanah. After Rosh Hashanah you are already after 14 days. So that's number one. The Tosfos doesn't like it because anyways we paskin like Abba Shol that even if you didn't do a giluach erev Yom Tiv, right? Yom Tiv will allow you can do it afterwards. He has another gewaldike concept. He speaks about shmur karei v'shmur achoika. Everyone is a chiddush. What shmur achoika? What did we say? That if you heard it after 30 days, now we added the detail shmur achoika, which allows the 7th immediate mourners not even to count shiva. Forget about shloishim, right? They just do mixas hayoim, and that's the whole avelus. It's after 30 days. Okay, that's the chiddush over here. So if it began In other words, if the person passed away and they were buried before Rosh Hashanah, even though count the days, you don't have, it's within the 30 days. Since halachically, after Rosh Hashanah, we're extending this, it's considered you already went through 14 days, you're going to come to the Shloshim a lot quicker. If someone then heard about it, that will be called a Shmuar HaChoika. Tosfos doesn't like it either. Anyway, this is a Gavaldik Tosfos. Back in the Gemara. Amar Avino, Hilkach, one day before Sukkot. So let's go through the same thing. Now, there's no real chiddush here. So Sukkot cancels the Shiva. Sukkot obviously is a 7-day Yom Tiv, so it eats up 7 days. But now we have Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is the Charegel. Shmini Atzeres, which is 1 day, will be considered another 7 days. So Yom Echad Lifnei Chag. Then you have the Chag. Then you have Shmini Shaloi. Harei kan esrim ve'echad yoim. Instead of 14, now you have another 7 days. Says the Gemara Ravina, Ikla, he once visited to Surah, but here again, there was the famous Surah, and then you have the Surah that's on the Pras River, that's the non-famous Surah. And Amalei Rab Chavivav, who was the Rav over there, Misura, or he lived there, Surah the Pras, to Ravina, Amar Mar Yoim Echad Lifnei Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah Harekan Arba Asar. In other words, it seems like everyone accepted Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Yoshia. Amar Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yoshia. They accepted that. But don't forget that he was speaking about the regel. The big stretch was saying that even a moyed, the moyed, even if it is a machlokes b'chlal, whether it cancels, it cancels and it counts for 7 days. Do you hold to that? So Amalei, Ana mistabra keram Gamliel udamina. There's so many ways of learning it. But let's go. I take a paskin like Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel is the most lenient sheet again on Daf Yutes. Yeah, he taka holds that even a moyed cancels, but I never said more than that. And he rejected this whole concept by a moyed, that the moyed itself should count like 7 days. Zois loy. Chavra, let's have time. Let's start. I want to start because next daf is very big, and I'm not up to the hour yet. Let's go. Says the Mishnah. Now, with details. The obligation of kriya. The minhag then of doing choyltzin, I just want to add that detail, that they didn't go around the whole shiva with their bare shoulder, is that, let's go with the Rabbeinu Chananel. Let's say, for not father and mother, they would tear on top of their right side. And then they would put their arm out. Maybe even then they only did this choylitz for aveim. They only did, so they would rip it on the left side, and they would rip all the garments, all ad shemagalas liboy. Okay, and then they would stick their hand out, and they would go bare-shouldered. V'loy mevaren, the whole idea of serving mourner's meal is only on the karoiv of shalmeis, as we learned above, the 7 relatives. But other people that taka are participating in the tsar, they don't do kriya, and they don't do choyltzin, and they don't. They're not gonna. They won't sit together with the people by the Sudas Havra. It says ve'ein mevarin ela mita zakufa. Now Sudas Havra, then again the mourners would eat it on the street, and everyone would join them. So the pshat is you can join them, but don't sit on a low chair. You can join the meal, but you have to sit on an upright chair. Now the problem is, we already quoted that there are other people for whom we have to rip kriya. So daf chafei, let's chaparain. It's very easy Gemara. A few more minutes. Frek Gemara. What do you mean? The Mishnah says that you don't do kriya. Va'en cholzen only krayv of shalmeis, and even if it's a chacham, what are you talking about? V'hatanya chacham shalmeis hakoil krayvav. And what does that mean? Everyone is the relative. Hakoil karevav salkataitek. It doesn't mean that on a biological level. Elo hakoil kikroivav, meaning, listen, everyone is mechoyev to rent their garments. Everyone does choyltzin. Vahakoil mavrin olav berachava. Mavrin means that they're not only there; they sit on a low chair, mamish the way we eat the sudas hamafsekes, and they have the bread and the eggs. So the Gemara says, our Mishnah is speaking about someone who's not a chacham. Says the Gemara, that's incomplete answer, because there is a concept. Chacham we already learned. Chacham is someone who any halachic question that he is asked from any area in halacha, he can give you an answer. That's the chacham. And Adam Kasher in Yiddish is called the Erle Chiyid. It's not about how much halacha does he have memorized in his mind. He's an Erle Chiyid. Ve'i Adam Kasher who? Also chayuv mechayiv lemikra. B'tanya that mipnei ma banav u'benoisav shel adam meisim kshem ketanim. Now, obviously, there's a reason why the child was only here for a short amount of time. That child's mission was only for a short amount of time. But the fact that the hashgacha pratis, that child was given to the parents that it was given to, so where there's why did they have to undergo through that suffering? Obviously, a lot of it is beyond our understanding, but one insight in why such a thing could happen. Now here, these words are problematic, which it will be corrected. Is in order to make this person mourn when an Adam Kasher passes away. And the Gemara interrupts. Yifke v'yisabel, future tense? What do you mean? Someone goes through a tsar now because of something that's going to happen in the future? Is it ervoino kashakul minei? What God is taking some sort of security in advance? No, it means if someone did not properly mourn on an Adam Kasher, which is what we're learning, you have to even rip kriya on an Adam Kasher. Someone didn't do it, so then Rahman al-Islam, they can be the parents of a child that was only meant to be here for a short amount of time. And in the positive, shekol haboicho mesabel olam kasher moich l'noyach kol avinoisav b'shvil kavod she'asoloi. So we're right there a problem. How can the Mishnah say ein koid of elo? Answers the Gemara, our Mishnah delav adam kasher. The Gemara is still not happy. What if one is present when any other yid departs to the other world? That person present chayuv and mechayiv, not even for an adam kasher, and not for an apikoides, and not for a mumar lahachis, but for anyone. The Tanya Rab Shimon Lazar Omer Ha'omer Alameis b'shashi siyas neshama chayiv likroya. And this beautiful statement again, as we had at the end of Megillah, that a Jew is a living Sefer Torah. The Holy Baal Shem Tov says that every Jew is a letter in the Torah. The way that Rabbeim say every Yid is a letter in the Luchais. Lamazed doimel leSefer Torah shenisraf. And if a person witnesses that shechayev likroya, what do you mean? Ein koiden elam. Again, we must say the leikoya hasam b'shas yisiyas neshama. If you're not there and it's not another chacham and not another kosher, then only for the 7 relatives. Just to quickly speak out, Pashat al pinigla, that what does a doctor do? What a doctor is going to just to know. Nowadays, doctors are not mechuyev to go rent their garments. The question is why not? But they're not mechuyev to do so, even though there are many doctors that have the schus to be with the patient. But if they would be takachai, they have to find a heter. But if you're not a doctor and you're going from room to room and this one is passing away and that one is passing away and you're going to be renting your hospital gown the whole time, you can't do that. Then a person who's b'shas yitziyas neshama theoretically is chayiv to do the mitzvah of kriya. We'll stop over here, God willing, to be continued.